Welcome to everyone. Thanks to Ariel and to my daughter Nechama, who are manning or womaning, I guess, the technical aspects of this presentation. Can people hear me? Maybe you could just give me some sort of a wave. Okay, greetings to a lot of friends, and thanks for joining me. Tonight, as you probably know, is the Yahrtzeit today, tomorrow, of R Moshe Shapira, R Moshe Meir, our great teacher. And what I thought I'd do is speak a little bit about him with your permission. And what I intend to do is maybe just reminisce a little bit, if that's okay with you. You know, over the years, I've had occasion to speak about him and transmit some of his teachings and some things about him. But I thought we could, if you permit me, be a little bit more personal and just maybe reminisce. So this might not be necessarily in perfect order. I've been in bed for the last couple of days with flu or something similar, so haven't had the time to actually sit down and write it all out in logical order, but I'm sure you'll bear with me and allow me to reminisce personally. I think some people may enjoy or benefit from hearing a little bit about my personal relationship with him, as opposed to just talking about him in sort of objective view. Makes it a bit more subjective, a bit more personal. And I hope that's okay with you. The problem is in trying to talk about Rav Moshe, maybe I should start with a picture. And of course, you can all, this beautiful photograph of Moshe taken by Akiva Sinclair. Believe it or not, he actually posed for this picture. And the reason he posed for it was because Rabbi Akiva told him that the book of photographs would be published for charity. So then Rav Moshe agreed. Otherwise, there's no way that he would have agreed. This is him taken at my daughter's wedding. Another one we took at the same occasion. Very, very aristocratic, regal personality, impossible to describe. Here's one of my personal photographs. This is the two of us together, my son's wedding in London. Okay, so, and of course, you know, you don't have to take that from me. There's lots of stuff online. In fact, recently, a website was set up called lahavin.org, at which you can access more than 1,000 of his shiurim, and it's indexed and searchable. There are a lot of videos online. So if your Hebrew is good enough, or in some cases Yiddish, you can access his shiurim. And therefore, I will try to give, as I said, a bit more of a personal reminiscences. Rav Shapira was born 1935, if I'm not mistaken, Tel Aviv area. You have to realize he was raised in a world where the Torah world was in some ways broader than it is today. And I'll try to express a little bit about his breadth of knowledge and experience that will be atypical today. Part of it was due to the opportunities that he had, and part of it was due to his abnormally broad grasp and personality, as I'll try to explain as well. But that's the era in which he was raised, from a illustrious Torah family on both sides of his family. I think he mentioned to me once that he was descended from the Chacham Tzvi, and he was deeply immersed all his life in Torah. I think if I would sum it up to the best of my ability, he spent 40 years learning and 40 years teaching. 40 years of learning incredibly intensely. I happen to know someone who was a roommate of his in a Hebron yeshiva, and that person, who's a great head of a Beis Din for many, many years, certainly no slouch himself when it comes to learning. He told me that he shared a room with Rabbi Shapira, Rav Moshe, and he was never in bed when he went to bed, and he was never in bed when he got up. In other words, when he slept, no one knows. But I try to explain to you that during the 40 years of intense learning, he achieved a level of depth which is impossible to imagine. You know, you would speak to him about a subject and hear a level of depth which was astounding, and then you'd go back after having thought about it and you'd hear another whole level or another whole angle. So what amazes me, and I've never been able to fathom, is that if you spend 40 years learning, okay, you could know a lot, but to have layer beyond layer of depth, inexhaustible layers, which means you got the feeling that when he taught you something incredible depth, it was only just one particular angle, one particular layer, perhaps what could be fitted into the time available. And if you went back and explored the subject further, you'd have another whole world of depth beyond that. And to the best of my ability to perceive, that was inexhaustible. Where did he have time to do that? Just to give you some insight into this, I personally have 14,000 shiurim of his recorded. 14,000 shiurim, and those are only ones that were recorded and the ones that I personally been able to collect. I once made a calculation that if he taught for 40 years, and I was close to him for 35 years or so, if he taught for 40 years, you'd have to say 3 to 4 shiurim a day to generate that number. I'm talking only about the ones that we know of that were recorded. On most days, you'd have to say 3 to 4 shiurim a day. So when people say that he gave 20 to 30 shiurim a week, that must not be an exaggeration. So almost impossible to fathom that sort of an output. And it's also important to know he never said the same shiur twice. He actually said that. He never said the same shiur twice. It's true that there were common themes. That is quite correct. I heard a number of themes from him on repeated occasions, but each time was new. There was always a new angle, a new depth, a new perception, a new connection. Those of you who attended the weekly shiurim in Yerushalayim, you'll know that every week he used the same formula. He'd start with something in the parsha. He'd then show you where it was derived from the first time it appeared in the Torah. He'd then show you where it was located in the word that the Torah used for that thing. He'd then show you where it was located in the cycle of the year. It would invariably connect it to some political or current event that was taking place. And very often it was the same basic theme as the year before, but a whole new angle and a whole new depth. And sometimes that continued for 20 years. So incredible talent and freshness. And one of the frustrations of having to talk about him is that you're frustrated by feeling that all you saw was a tiny layer of an unfathomable depth, and only one angle on that is that you're only one individual. And I must say that although I was devoted to him and I spent years being as close as I possibly could, there were many people who knew much better than I did, people who had the weight of the Jewish people's decisions on their shoulders, whom he helped them make and guided, people who knew him, spent more time with him. And each of those people, some of them many of them leading personalities in the Jewish world today, the Torah world today, I suppose each one felt that they were uniquely close to him and that he was guiding them in a very personal way. So each of us is perhaps portraying just one small sliver of a multifaceted personality that's beyond our capacity to describe. I must say personally, again, I said I'd make this personal. When he died 5 years ago, in one way, I mourned his passing more than that of my father. In one way, my father was the same age as he was when he died. They were both 81, 82 years old. But when I lost my father, I had a very strong feeling that my father had already taught me all the things he wanted to teach me. My father taught me many things. He was an amazing doctor, an unbelievably good doctor. And in my own medical career, he taught me many things. And I had the feeling that he had taught me most of the things he knew that I needed to know. But when Rabbi Shapira died, I was only just beginning. So many questions that crop up now that I don't have the keys to. And what you got from him was not an answer to your question. You got a key to unlock that area of Torah. In fact, that is one of the things he specialized in teaching us, was giving us the keys, how to descend to the root. I once had the effrontery to say to him, and I must tell you again personally, I very seldom, I spoke to him as little as possible. I was too afraid. I was too afraid. I spoke when I was spoken to, and unless I had an important question, I gathered the courage. I was too afraid to speak to him. So the number of occasions he wasn't the kind of person you just chatted with, because even a casual chat with him was something of rare depth. But on one occasion, I had the effrontery to tell him that the two most important things you ever taught us, I said, were first of all, the importance of da'as. That means what it means to have your own independent ability to think originally for yourself, what da'as means, a raw, intrinsic, deep grasp of things as they are, not through the intellect. I don't mean without intellect, but I mean beyond intellect. And the second was that you taught us how to descend to the root of every subject, how to track it back to its basics, the key that unlocks it. And he agreed fully. When I say he agreed fully, he said nothing. When he said nothing, it meant he agreed with you. If he didn't agree with you, he shut you down in flames with no uncertain terms. So the fact that he didn't respond on that occasion, I knew that what I'd said was accurate. So we're talking about a personality, born 1935, he died 5 years ago. And every aspect of his life was unique. I mean, we shouldn't omit to mention Tbala L'chaim is Rebbetzin, a very unusual lady, a lady in the ultra Haredi world who taught philosophy at the Hebrew University. You have to understand what a radical position that is. And he surrounded himself, shall I say, with that sort of unusual depth. On the one hand, fitting into the mold of a conventional Rosh Yeshiva. On the other hand, a breadth that was beyond that, which you'll find in the broadest of intellectual traditions. My own personal relationship with him, I moved to Israel in 1982 to devote my life to learning, moved basically out of medicine. I decided to move out of an opening up academic career in medicine. I know it may be hard to believe, but I did have promise in that field. Yes, I know it may be a little unbelievable, but I had potential in that field, and I decided that Torah was more important and went to Israel. I practiced the medicine first at the same time as learning. But the first time I met him was on a Thursday night. It was suggested to me that I attend the Thursday night Shiur, which is a very famous event. Thousands of people came through that Shiur. There were hundreds there at any one time. It was a very famous high point of the Jerusalem scene. And one Thursday night, I went in there as a relative beginner, and it changed my life forever. I still remember what he spoke about that night. I remember that I didn't understand what he meant. I understood very little, but I realized immediately this was a level of sophistication and depth that far transcended anything I'd come across. And apart from the presentation, the unbelievable dignity and obvious level of consciousness and awareness and perception, apart from grace and royalty, I was changed forever. And after that, I pursued a personal relationship. How did it happen? The first time I had a chance to speak to him personally was I had written a book, my first book, and he obviously had heard about it. I didn't know that. He was very close to the Or Sameach Rosh Yeshivas. In fact, the Shiur was hosted at that time in Or Sameach Yeshiva. And one day I had a car in Jerusalem, and one day I was driving down past Boys Town in Muddersdorf, and I saw him walking along the road, and I stopped to offer him a ride, and he got him, and as he sat down, I told him my name, and he said, "I've heard Lashon Hara about you." What is that? He'd heard about my book. And then since I had a car, I asked him if he ever needed to travel anywhere, and I managed to get out of him that he used to travel once a week to see his parents in Bnei Brak. So I told him that I'd like to take him to Bnei Brak. So he said to me, "Well, are you going there anyway?" So I said, "Yes, of course." Of course I was going there anyway. And so we used to spend every week or two, I would drive him to Bnei Brak, which is an incredible opportunity. I mean, 2 hours in the car, enabling, of course, I was sensitive enough to give him some time to himself, obviously. He didn't suffer fools easily. I thought many, many times and very hard before asking him a question. And I spent a lot of personal time with him. Then I begged him and wheedled my way into a number of chaburas, a number a week. I insisted on sitting right next to him. I used to make his tea. I would not allow anyone else to do that. One Shiur I began, actually, myself and Rabbi Newman and Rabbi Becha, when we were teaching in Or Sameach, we actually felt that although we were teachers, relatively speaking, we were beginners. I mean, again, we knew a lot more than the people we were teaching, but on our standards, we felt we were, at least I speak for myself, I felt I was very much a beginner. And so we felt we needed Rav Shapira to give us a shiur on teaching Torah. So we decided we'd go and ask him. One afternoon, we went to his home in Beit Vagan. We knocked on the door. He came to the door in his shirt sleeves with tefillin on. And during the day, afternoon, and we said, "We'd like to ask you something." He took us into his home. He said to us, "Will it be Torah or not? Nedaber b'Torah or lo?" He wanted to know if we keep the tefillin on or not. If we told him it would be a Torah conversation, we said, "Yes, it's about Torah." He said, "Fine." He sat down with his tefillin on, and he said, "What would you like?" We said, "We've come to ask you to give us a shiur because we are teachers in Or Sameach. People depend on us. We have a responsible position. We're teaching Torah to another generation, and we ourselves, are relatively speaking, are beginners, and we need you to teach us how to teach Torah correctly and at the right depth." And Moshe only asked one question. He said to us, "Atem rotzim et zeh or atem tzrichim et zeh?" He said, "Do you want the shiur or do you need it?" And Baruch Hashem, I think the other two were a little bit taken aback. but I had a reflex response, and I said, without a moment's hesitation, I said, Ze chiyuni. In other words, it's absolutely vital. We can't live without it. And with a sort of a sagging of his shoulders and a sigh, he said, if that's the case, I cannot refuse. And so we started a shiur. It was a Monday afternoon at R Moshe for all the staff at R Moshe and a few other people. And over the years, we learned through all of Hilchos Talmud Torah with the commentaries, an amazing, amazing series of shiurim. 47 shiurim we had on weaving together the halachic aspects of teaching Torah with the hashkafic or philosophical aspects, an absolute masterclass on how to teach Torah with the halachic material and the depth. When that ended, we continued. We weren't prepared to let it go. And after that, we learned through Perek Chelek. I have 657 shiurim of his recorded on Perek Chelek. When that ended, we went into various other things. So I have that series. And that is, again, each one a masterclass. As I say, it was the second time he actually gave that series in Bnei Brak as well. Never was a shiur repeated. Of course, there were digressions. We used to ask questions, and there were many digressions. But we learned through the whole of Perek Chelek, which is an absolutely fundamental and central aspect of Jewish philosophical life approach, I guess you'd call it, dealing with this world, the next world, reward and punishment, Mashiach, fundamentals with virtue. There's no Tosfos, no commentaries. Very, very hard to find commentaries. Without Shapira's teaching, it would be a closed book to a large degree. So when I say 14,000 shiurim, you begin to understand I have series of his recorded that I've collected from students around the world. You name it. I've got thousands of shiurim on Mishnah, Gemara, in exquisite depth. Shiurim on Pelach HaRimoin, Pardes Rimonim, Kabbalah books, Sefer Yetzirah, Nefesh HaChaim, you name it. Question and answer sessions given to Israelis all across the board, from black belt Rosh Yeshivas that he used to teach on a Friday afternoon to a group of young Israeli boys trying to make their way back into the religious world that he taught in Telstone, answering questions. Almost incredible breadth and range. And of course, to each person he would speak in an appropriate fashion. He had students who were masters of philosophy. Benny Levy, for example, was a famous French philosophy protege of Jean-Paul Sartre. And he became a very, very deeply attached to Rav Moshe. You speak to him knowledgeably about his field. And that's how I got to know him. And then over the years, I attended all the shiurim. And ironically, when I moved to England 23 years ago, with great sadness at having to leave those shiurim, ironically or paradoxically, our relationship became even closer in one way, because we used to ensure that Rav Shapira would come and visit England a few times a year. And here I have to thank my friend, Rabbi Menashe Borden, who was absolutely central in organizing these visits. Rabbi Shapira used to stay with him. And so although we only saw him a few times a year, or my occasional visits to Israel, but we had very intense time together. He was staying in Rabbi Borden's home. We would eat meals together. We would have an intense, I have to shamefacedly admit, and on more than one occasion, we told Rav Moshe that we'd bring him to England to have a few days break. And then we worked him mercilessly, giving a few shiurim a day. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but we couldn't resist. And so we would have very, very close personal connection with him, in some ways far closer than would have been possible in Israel. Not only that, we had amazing times with him. When the shiur ended at about 1 in the morning or 1:30 in the morning, we would take a walk on the Thames from 2 in the morning to 4 in the morning, walking up and down by Parliament houses and Big Ben and asking questions that very few would have the time to ask him. Myself, Rabbi Borden, Ezra Stortz, we would have those amazing opportunities. I'd also like to acknowledge my debt not only to Rabbi Borden, but also to Rabbi Aubrey Hirsch, Rabbi Shiur Hartman, because the four of us together used to arrange trips to various sites in Europe, and those were some of the highlights of my life. We used to go with Rav Shapira to a destination where we would learn together the Torah of that destination. We had a group of 20 or 30 devoted students from around the world, and we would go and spend 3 to 4 days in Krakow, Vilna, Barcelona, Prague on many occasions, Italy, Venice, Padua, and in each place we would study the Torah of the Ramchal in Italy, or the Ramo, or in Prague. We would study the Maharal. We would go early in the morning before the tourists were allowed in. We would go to the Maharal's grave. I'll never forget the experience of 5, 6 in the morning, going into the Beis Olam, the cemetery in Prague, waiting for Rav Moshe to use the mikveh, and we used it after him, and then seeing him lie down on the grave of the Maharal, actually climb onto the tziyun, Mishtatech al Kivra Ovos, actually lie down on the grave of the Maharal. And just a few meters away, we would be sitting and learning the Torah of the Maharal. I have maybe 30 trips, I think, on record, all of them carefully, meticulously documented and recorded, of those trips during which we learned fundamental material. So those were amazing opportunities. He was a personality with an amazing sense of humor also, but again, everything that he did had depth. So his sense of humor was, shall I say, learned. I'll give you a couple of examples. He was sitting in a shiur in Ramot, and there was a noise outside the window. There was a young boys' yeshiva, and the students were making a noise. I asked them, they were playing in the playground outside during a break. They were making a noise, and Rav Moshe stopped the shiur and he said, "What's that noise?" So somebody said, "It's a yeshiva. It's a new yeshiva that's been established here." So Rav Moshe said, "What's it called?" So they said, "It's called Al Chomosayich Yerushalayim," right, which means on the walls of Jerusalem. I'm not going to translate every word here, but for those of you who are with me, it's called Al Chomosayich Yerushalayim. Without a moment's hesitation, Rav Moshe continued and completed the verse. What does the verse say? Al Chomosayich Yerushalayim ifkadeti shomrim kol hayom v'kol halayla tamid lo yecheshu, which means I've appointed guardians on the walls of Jerusalem. All day and all night they shall not be silent. I mean, you have to have a 48 times CD-ROM in there to locate the perfect posset at exactly the right moment. I'll tell you another example. He was sitting at a shalashulus in a shul, and they asked him to say a few words. So the rabbi of the shul was sitting there, and Rosh Shapira was sitting next to him, and sitting next to the rabbi of the shul was a young fellow called Billy, and Billy was new to Judaism and didn't really understand what Rav Moshe was saying. And it was the first of Nisan, it was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, 2 weeks before Pesach. And Rav Moshe was talking about Nisan and Pesach. And almost every sentence, Billy said to the rabbi, "What's he saying? What's he saying? I don't understand. Explain to me." And eventually, it was intruding on the shiur. So the rabbi said to Billy said, "Listen, please be quiet. In 2 weeks' time, on Pesach, you'll come to me for the Seder. And then I'll tell you what Rav Moshe said." And as Rav Moshe heard those words, he said without a moment's hesitation, Yachol mi Rosh Chodesh, Talmud Lema bayom hahu, which is, just beyond genius. Okay, I'll leave it to those of you whose Hebrew is good enough to. And that was his way of thinking. I once heard someone who came back from, Moshe had spent some months, some time actually in America when his daughter was ill. She was taken there for medical treatment, and after many years later, Rav Moshe had occasion to visit the place that he'd been in the United States, happened to be in Stamford, Connecticut. And one of the students who'd been with him many years before said to him, how's the yeshiva? It's still there. Rav Moshe said, yeah, it's still there. He said, is it exactly the same as it used to be? Yes, exactly the same. The fellow said, the same curtains on the wall. He said, the same curtains. Rav Moshe said, and the same water in the mikveh. Anyway, so I would say he had a wicked sense of humor. And we saw flashes of it. When I say he had a sense of humor, he also had a very, very sharp side. A very sharp side. When it was necessary for the sharp side to come out, it came out. If you asked a stupid question, one fellow, if you asked a stupid question, you were made aware that the question, once in a shiur, one of the students asked Rav Moshe a question, and Rav Moshe said to him, that question's not even stupid. A few minutes later, the fellow asked another question. Rav Moshe said, "Oh, that's already stupid." The fellow was Israeli, so it didn't bother him. But that was the message. Once he was on a bus in Jerusalem, and there was an empty seat next to him. So somebody saw R Moshe Shapira's empty seat. He rushed up, young, Kollel fellow. He rushed up and he sat down next to him, started asking him questions. Rav Moshe turned to him and he said, "Nesiya ba'otobus lo mechayev sicha." A trip on the bus does not obligate one in a conversation. No, end of conversation. He was once traveling on a plane, and somebody, a very precocious, brash type of personality, you'd have to be brash to say this sort of thing to Rabbi Shapira. He saw him on the plane, so this fellow walked up to him and sat himself down next to Rav Moshe, and he said to him in Hebrew, he said to Rabbi Shapira, what can you teach me that I don't know already? Rav Moshe said, lishtok. how to be silent. Okay, so that was it. And he had a very incisive way, a very decisive and incisive way. Once he was walking in Beit Vagan, and it was a short walk, I don't know, maybe 100 yards from where he came out of his house to the bus stop. And a Beit Vagan person, older man, was walking past. It was raining, and this man had an umbrella. So he saw Rav Moshe, hurried up to him, and he walked with his umbrella over the two of them. And as they were walking along, this man said to Rav Moshe, Lama zekara, why did it happen? He was referring to the Holocaust. This was somebody evidently had a personal connection with it, personal experience. They were walking towards the bus stop, and he said to Rav Moshe, why did it happen? And Rav Moshe was completely silent till they reached the bus stop, and he said to him, Boker Tov. And he said to us afterwards, he said the effrontery and the degree of shallowness that a person has to have thinking that you can ask a Rosh Yeshiva to explain the Holocaust in 100 yards, the walk of 100 yards. He said there were just no words to. I just said Boker. He said I said to him Boker Tov. No, you have to understand I must say, when I asked him for advice, when I asked him personal questions, usually the answers were 3 words, 4 words. Right? Sometimes 3 words, sometimes, and I remember them, no discussions and explanations. And usually when he said those 3 or 4 words to me, the situation was so clear. He shone a light on the situation where the clarity was obvious. Right? 3 words. I'll give you an example. When it came time to move to England, again, 20-something years ago, opportunity to come and teach Torah in England. And the suggestion came up, and it was obvious to me, at least it seemed likely I could do some good things in England. On the other hand, didn't want to leave Israel, right? Leave Israel, leave his shiurim, leave the opportunity to spend time with him. On the other hand, for the benefit of the Jewish people, it seemed perhaps I'd be able to do something in England. I went and put the question to him and said, look, but this opportunity's come up. It seems like it's the right thing to do, but I don't want to leave Israel. He said to me 3 words in English. He said to them in very clear English. He said, we are soldiers. And the conversation, the soldier goes where he's posted. That was the end of the conversation. We moved to England. Didn't need a discussion, didn't need a conversation. And once or twice criticism, I remember a mistake I was making. He said it in 4 words. I won't tell you what it is, too embarrassing, but 4 words of criticism. On another occasion, I'll tell you one particular criticism that he gave me. I heard many over the years, I can assure you. Gently, but very, very firmly. There was a particular community I was living in at the time, and there was an argument going on. Let's call it, unfortunately, a machlekes, an argument. And I took sides very idealistically and got involved in the argument. And when I went to tell him about it, to complain because there was bitter fallout, he said to me 3 words, chok v'lo ya'avor. That's all he said. It means it's a rule that shall be unbroken. You got involved in an argument? How could you do that? How could you do that? Got involved in machlekes, chok v'lo ya'avor. On that occasion, I insisted on continuing and showing him why I was right and it was idealistic and I needed to do it. Not only did he show me that I was wrong, he also showed me that I'd taken the wrong side as well. Anyway, so the answer was 3 words long. In all 35 years of my knowing him, I received 4 compliments from him ever. 4 compliments, 2 directly and 2 indirectly. In case you want to know what the compliments were, they're no big deal. One was about my writing. He said he appreciated a certain thing about my writing, even though I didn't read the English, but he'd been told about it. And the second was, he said my Hebrew was good. Right? And from him, that is an amazing, he was a master of the Hebrew language. He was a unbelievable master in terms of his grasp and teaching of the depth of the Hebrew language as the vehicle of Torah. And 2 indirect compliments I got from him. One was, he said to a friend, there's a big Talmud Chacham in Bnei Brak, when some complaint had come up about people misquoting him. He said, Akiva ma'avir, he said to this person that Akiva Tatz transmits my messages clearly. That was an amazing, amazing compliment. And the second, another compliment was, he said that a young fellow went to him once in Jerusalem with some philosophical problems, and R Moshe told him, read the books of Akiva Tatz, English-speaking fellow. But I can show you over 35 years, those were the only 4 compliments. So, of course, you can imagine how I treasure them, but I try to use them to dilute the criticisms. By the way, just as a thought comes to me, as a master of the Hebrew language, I've begun a collection. Unfortunately, time makes it difficult. But over the last few years, what I've done is in the collection of Shiurim, as I constantly revise his recorded Shiurim, every time I come across the teaching of a word, very often Rav Shapira would teach a Torah point by showing you. Let me back up for a moment. One of the most important things he taught us, as I mentioned, was how to go back to the roots of things. And one of the roots of things in Torah is the words. If the words of Torah are the vehicles for Torah, then the words are part of the message. The medium and the message in Torah are one, very, very deeply, unlike other languages. And very often he'd be making a point and explain how the word, the Hebrew word, actually meant what it says in a very deep way. And while he was on the subject, he would show how the root of that word expressed itself in many other words and show the commonality of all of those words. Incidentally, if any of you involved in outreach, that's all you need. You show people the depth, the incredible, uncanny depth of the Hebrew language. It's inspired chemical nature, how it works. Once you see Hebrew clearly, it becomes impossible to theorize that it's a language that accreted by chance over time, which the linguistic theory holds. And so what I've done over the last few years is I've taken, every time I come across a shiur where he does that, I've noted at which minute and second in the shiur he goes into that discussion. I've then recorded that shiur separately and made a document detailing what the word was and what its various cognates were and where it can be found on that shiur. So I have quite a list of those at the present time. And in Mitzvah Hashem, I'll make it a public, I'll put it up on my website, or I'll make it available to those who want to. I'll actually provide the whole shiur, so you don't only listen to the few minutes where he's talking about the particular word, but you'll be able to listen to the whole context as well. And there'll be probably a few hundred shiurim where each of those will contain a word root in Hebrew and show you why. You know, why does para, for example, which means to repay a debt, why does it also mean to uncover, for example? Or why does, whatever it is, I mean, you know, so many cognates of Hebrew words that are fundamental to understand. So, incidentally, he was also a master of the linguistic theory. I should also mention here, he was incredibly broadly knowledgeable about many things: philosophy, art, music, linguistics, very, very uncannily knowledgeable about those things, as well as deeply insightful on an intuitive psychological level in terms of personalities and sensitive to people's situations and needs. But again, very difficult to understand. Where did he get the time to absorb that broad wisdom? What else can I tell you? He had a sense of drama and timing as well. I noticed that although his presentation was primarily intellectual and incredibly structured, but he was not above putting in stories or drama where necessary in order to make a point. And anyone in teaching knows that a good presentation needs an emotional content as well, something to drive home the message. And he had a very sharp appreciation of those. I'll just give you one example of a story that he told us. In fact, this had a particular poignancy and depth for me because I actually heard this from him while walking in Auschwitz. I would never have gone there myself, but because one of our trips to Europe included a visit to Auschwitz, I'll never forget, we were walking along the train tracks in Auschwitz. Can you imagine the mood? And Rav Shapira told us about an incident that occurred to him when he was a boy in the Hebron Yeshiva. Of course, those years, you can imagine, were not that long after the war itself. And he told us the following story. He said there was a boy in the yeshiva, Bocha in the yeshiva, who was extremely talented, an extremely talented actor. And on Motzei Shabbos, this boy used to put on a play for the other boys in the yeshiva. I suppose you're talking about a boy who was 16 or 17 or 18 years old, I don't know exactly. And this fellow used to put on a play for all the other boys. And it was a one-man play. He was the actor, he was the full cast, he was the director, he was the producer. This one fellow was everything. And one Saturday night, one Motzei Shabbos, the play consisted of the following scene. It was a one-scene, one-act play. and it comprised a Jew who'd been killed in Auschwitz. And this bocher played the part of a Jew who'd been killed in Auschwitz. And the play consisted of him arriving in Shemaim, right, in the heavenly realm, and he meets Hashem, he meets God. And God says to him, welcome, what would you like? And this Jew says to Hashem, I would like all the good things that you have here. This is I've heard about this, the world to come and the world of reward and the world of idyllic bliss, and I'd like my share. So Hashem says to the man, he says to him, well, I have a few basic questions and requirements. Before people are admitted to this dimension of pleasure in the world to come, there are certain questions that I ask. So the man said yes. So Hashem says, did you know any Torah? The man says no. Hashem says, did you keep Shabbos? The fellow says no. Hashem said, did you put tefillin on? The man says no. I was raised in a reform environment. No one ever taught me anything about Torah. Hashem said, but did you do anything Jewish at all? I mean, did you any Jewish practice, any Jewish observance? The man says no. So Hashem says to the man, but look, you want to share in my world to come of ecstasy and reward, but you never did anything Jewish. So I'm not sure you can be admitted here. So the man says to Hashem, for Hitler, I was Jewish enough, but not for you. So Hashem says to the man, let me convene the heavenly court and we'll discuss your case. And the fellow waits and the heavenly court convenes. And after deliberation, the spokesman of the heavenly court comes out and makes a proclamation, Halacha ke Hitler, right? Which means case decided according to Hitler, not according to God. Okay, that was Rabbi Moshe's, that was the story that was the play that was put on for him in the yeshiva. So being with him was always a very intense. If you were alert to nuance and alert to greatness, it was a very intense experience. He also had again let me give you another example of a breadth of grasp and insight. I heard this from Rabbi Becher. This did not happen to me, but my friend Rabbi Mordechai Becher told me that when he was in yeshiva when he was, I think, 19, 20 years old, in Itri, in the yeshiva with Shapira, he was the Rosh Yeshiva, and he guided them and nurtured them. With Rabbi Shiur, Akash was one of those, and many also was there, Nissel, and they all tell amazing stories from that time. So Rabbi Becher tells the following story. He said he was walking down the corridor past Rabbi Moshe's office, and a Hasidic bocher, one of the boys in yeshiva, came from a very Hasidic home, very, very, very narrowly Hasidic, can I say, not exposed to anything else in the world. And he was standing outside of Moshe's office looking very, very perplexed. What had happened was he'd gone in to ask Rabbi Moshe about life direction, about seeking values and following a path of correct values and setting goals for himself in life. And he was standing in the corridor outside after this meeting with Rabbi Shapira, looking very perplexed. So Mordechai Becher said to this bocher, said, like, oh, what are you looking perplexed for? What happened? He said, I went into Rabbi Shapira and I asked him how to set life goals, and he told me to read a poem by Rudyard Kipling called If. Now, how Rabbi Moshe, it's a poem in English, but Moshe didn't read English. He told him to read a poem by Kipling in order to answer his question. Let me read it for you. I hope you'll indulge me. This is the poem that Rabbi Moshe Shapira told a Hasidic boy to read, American Hasidic boy. If you don't mind, I'll read you the poem. Kipling, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up again with worn out tools, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss and lose and start again at your beginnings and never breathe a word about your loss, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on where there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can walk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch. If neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. That's what he told a Hasidic boy from Brooklyn to go and read in order to choose life direction and life values. By the way, they're very poignant. There's a line in here that says that if you can force your nerve and sinew to continue when there's nothing left. He was very ill, Rav Shapira. And in the last years of his illness, when he was incapacitated, it didn't change him at all. As soon as he was able to stand, he was paralyzed from the waist down at one point from a complication of his treatment. And as soon as he could hold on to a walking frame steadily enough to basically crawl into the yeshiva, came back to give a shiurim. So we saw that. What else can I tell you? He had an even-handed personality, as my daughter Ruthie puts it, matun. That means calm, absolutely calm in all circumstances. That means he could be screamingly late due to circumstances. There wasn't a flicker of frustration or rushed movement, right? Whether it was benching, saying each word, you could stand next to him, listen to the davening. It was an experience too. Absolutely every word, meticulously and slowly, what was going around was completely irrelevant. Sit next to him, benching. Right, even in informal circumstances, I had the privilege of seeing him sitting in his shirt sleeves, benching after breakfast. Every single word methodically enunciated with total focus and concentration. And no matter what the pressure, I was once in his sukkah with about 6 or 7 Israelis, old senior students of his, small sukkah in Beit Vegan. And as we were sitting and talking, an Israeli debt collector burst into the sukkah. I'm talking about, with apologies to the Israelis, an Israeli debt collector. You know, they don't choose people who are meek and mild to be debt collectors, and certainly not when dealing with Israelis. This fellow had a check in the name of Shapira, which obviously was the wrong. R Moshe never had a bank account, to the best of my knowledge, for various reasons. He never had a bank account. But this fellow had a check that had bounced from some Shapira or other, and he'd obviously tracked the wrong man. And the fellow burst into the sukkah, and Ata Shapira. I mean, there was a moment's silence before the 6 or 7 Israelis rose up to dismember the fellow. But before they could do that, Rav Moshe answered in completely even-handed terms, explained to the fellow, it couldn't be me, I don't even know, like totally unruffled, not a flicker of riposte, or the fellow crawled out of there with his tail between his legs. But no matter what the circumstances were, desperate illness, whatever it was, the same methodical matun, could be giving a shiur to 1,000 people. It could be talking to you personally, exactly the same depth of thoughtful perception and pace. People who needed help. I'll give you a couple of examples. I hope my friend Rav Zev Duna doesn't mind my saying this. Rav Zev told me that when his brother died, he went to see Rav Shapira. Rav Shapira was sitting in Eitz Chaim at the time in Yerushalayim. He had a large room. He used to sit and learn there in the mornings. And Zev told me that he walked in and he needed to talk. His brother had been killed and he needed to talk. And he sat down. And before he said a word, Rav Moshe took one look at his face. Slowly he stood up, walked over to the door and locked it, which meant that this is our time. No one's going to interfere. No one will intrude. And Rav Moshe came back and sat at his desk and he sat there and listened. That's all. Just sat and listened. He needed to talk. And Rav Moshe sat there, didn't say a word, just listened until it had all come out. Another person, Moti Cohen, listen to this amazing insight. Moti Cohen, the late Moti Cohen, was very close to Rav Moshe. He used to traveled with him in many parts of the world, and suffered a disastrous illness, a terminal illness. And a couple of months before he died, maybe 3 months before he died, he went to Rav Shapira. What do you do in a circumstance like that? You ask him. He said, what is my work in this phase? He knew that his time was limited. He had maybe a few months left to live. He went to Rav Shapira and he said to him, what do I do now? What's my work in these circumstances? Listen to what Rav Shapira told him. He said, Tid'ag shetivnelecha koma nosefet. An amazing thing. He said, make sure you construct for yourself an extra story, another floor. you have an opportunity now to add something in your life that you could never have done in other circumstances. You can build another floor to your building. This is a challenge to you to build another story. Right? An amazing insight. He gave a shiur here in London to parents in Stamford Hill, actually, to parents of special needs, parents with very, very, very special, children with extreme special needs, people who tended to be, could easily be broken by their experiences. Of the most amazing shiur. That one happened to be in Yiddish. We actually had it transcribed in Hebrew and English afterwards. A very amazing talk, full of intense empathy, but also amazing insights in what it means to be a parent, a completely different take on what it means to be a parent, which is quite outstanding. I'll just tell you one of the incidents from that talk. If anyone wants it, of course, you're welcome to. Perhaps I should post these things on my website, but if you email me, I'm very happy to send you the recording. In fact, send you a recording, send you the transcript, or anything else you want that I can share with you, I'm happy to do as well. I'll just tell you one incident that he mentioned. He said that the story that he told in that presentation was of a young avrech, a young Torah scholar in Jerusalem, whose wife had gone away for some time, and he was taking care of the children. And he said a friend walked in, and he saw this young Torah scholar who was on the floor with the kids jumping up and down on him. There was ketchup on the walls. I mean, it was a chaos, disaster scene. And he was trying to cope with these children. No doubt his wife knew how to do it, but his wife was away, and he was just, he was literally on the floor, on his back, children jumping up and down on him, spraying ketchup around the walls. And this he said to his friend. He looked at his friend and he said, when will they ever pay me back? When will they ever be able to? How will they ever pay me back, right? For this. In other words, that was the question that he asked, and the other fellow was taken aback, and he went to ask somebody very great, one of the great rabbis that Rabbi Shapira himself looked up to, and he said he went to ask the question. His friend said to him, I think that the way they will pay you back, he said to his friend, you're lying on the floor, you're suffering to raise your children, and you're struggling through it. The way they will pay you back is when they turn out the way you want, and they set up their own homes and they have their own children, and it'll go forward, and that's when you'll be paid back. And it disturbed him. So he went to ask this great rabbi in Jerusalem, was that the correct response? And Rav Moshe told us very, very clear, no uncertain terms. He said that response is close to kfirah, close to denial of God, that response. But why? He said the goal of being a parent, the payback when you'll get paid back by your children or rewarded or the consequences, is completely the wrong vision. The vision in being a parent is chesed. The vision of being a parent is God, and of course in Rav Moshe's classic, inimitable terms, he said the reason God creates us is because of chesed. He doesn't do it for any payback. He's doing it out of chesed. God doesn't need us. He creates us for us. And when you become godly and create children, you do it out of chesed. You're not doing it because there'll be a payback, right? Of no kind. We're not talking about selfish payback. We're talking about this father meant the payback will be when your children find their own homes and pay it forward. He wasn't talking about selfish payback. It doesn't mean they'll support me in my old age. He wasn't talking nonsense. He was talking about children founding their own Torah families. That's what he meant by payment. That's legitimate. Rabbi Moshe said, no, that's not legitimate. Not legitimate. When God creates us, he does it out of chesed. And when you have children, your motivation is chesed. Pure chesed, you do it. And what a vision. If you're struggling with a child with difficulties, this is a completely new insight. Anyway, if your Yiddish is good enough, email me. I'm very happy to download you the actual presentation. You can hear the way that he puts it to them. Completely new take. What else can I tell you? He was at the head, spearheaded the tshuva movement of our generation. First of all, he led it himself in terms of the Israeli Balei Tshuva, and in terms of the South Americans and the Russians and the United States and England and South Africa. Basically, he directed the people who were leading those movements, partially himself and partially through his direction of those people. There was an article by Amnon Dankner. Amnon Dankner was a very articulate and eloquent spokesman in the Israeli intelligentsia. He was the editor of Haaretz for a long time. And Amnon Dankner wrote an article, very interesting article in Hebrew in Haaretz. This is going back to the early 1980s, I guess. He wrote an article called Levadi. It's an outstanding piece. You actually read it. You should read it. I actually remember a time when the outreach movements were reprinting it. It's a secular Israeli, again, a completely secular, left-leaning, Israeli intellectual. Became a novelist later as well. He later moved to Ma'ariv. But when he was heading Haaretz, when he was a journalist at Haaretz, he wrote a very, very interesting article called Levadi. You have to remember this was a time, Levadi means on my own or alone. This was a time when the leading Israeli performers and artists and musicians and filmmakers had chosen to move into a religious lifestyle. They were led by Ika Israeli, who Ika, I think, was born more or less the same year as R Moshe. He was a very well-known Israeli artist. Uri Zohar followed. Mordechai Anon was one of them. Leading Israeli intellectuals and public figures, and particularly those in the entertainment industry, many of them moved into religious mode. And it was very noticeable in Israeli society. And you're talking about Israelis doing it overnight. It was radical. You're not talking about, South Africans become religious gradually over time. English, everything in England takes a couple of centuries. So in England, a person becomes religious, they go to seed and they learn for 25 years and they become religious, Americans are a bit more faddish, so maybe they become religious in a couple of years. But Israelis, it's overnight, absolutely overnight. I'll never forget the experience of going to R Moshe Shapira's Shiur on a Thursday night. And I'm standing on the steps of Osama Yeshiva, and a young Israeli fellow, long hair and a ponytail, real, completely secular Israelis, walking up the stairs trembling. And he says to me, Eifo Doresh Harav Shapira? Where is R Moshe Shapira's Shiur? He'd heard about it, he was coming, and he was trembling because he knew he was going to hear something that would change his life overnight. And the next day he would be religious. You're talking about, if this is the truth, I'm doing it. Okay? You need to hear stories like this. You need to hear Rabbi Wallis' story, for example. Listen to the story of Rabbi Wallis, right? And hear about a radical grappling with the truth and changing overnight. Trembling. Eifo Doresh Rav Shapira, right? I'm going to hear that Shiur, and if I hear it, I'm religious tomorrow. So these were people who changed in that way. And it was well known in Israeli society. So Amnon Dankner wrote a piece which was published in the secular Israeli newspaper, Haaretz, Levadi. And the article said like this: where are my friends? Where are my friends? Where are the leading? Where's my friend? We used to go and drink together and paint the town red. Where's the friend that we used to go take out the women where's this one? Where's that one? My friend from the army, my friend from university. Where are they? You know where they are? They swaying backwards and forwards in some yeshiva in Jerusalem. They're sitting with some dusty old books. Where are they? He was lamenting the movement of his. You're talking about a leading Israeli intellectual, and he was noticing one after another his friends were disappearing, right? And the last line of the article was, "When will my turn come?" Anyway, he said, and I can tell you where they were. They were sitting at R Moshe Shapira's Shiur in Jerusalem. Uri Zohar, Amnon. Mordechai Anon. Mordechai Anon was a very, very charismatic Israeli entertainer, comedian. In fact, I'll never forget, probably in my whole life with Rav Shapira, and Rabbi Borden can back me up on this, because Rabbi Borden was sitting in the same Shiur on a Tuesday afternoon as I was. We didn't know each other at the time, but we both witnessed exactly the same event. It was a Tuesday afternoon Shiur, and it was a closed group. You were not admitted to that group unless you had excellent reason. You had to go and see him beforehand, and he would ask you why you needed it, and if you were married, and had you come to the Thursday Shiurim, he grilled you with 100 questions. It was quite a grilling before you were allowed into the Shiur. It was completely closed. Not only was it closed, if you arrived, you walked in after the beginning, you were sent out. And we were sitting there on a Thursday afternoon, and Mordechai Anon, who was this very charismatic Israeli comedian, is about 4'10". Very, very well known to all of Israeli society. He'd also been one of those that had moved into a religious mode. He walks in unannounced, and of course, he had never asked for permission. He walks in and he sits down. So Moshe stops cold, as he always did, and incredibly formal. This is the only time I ever saw anybody ever get the better of R Moshe Shapira. He walks in and he sits down. R Moshe stops the Shiur cold, and he said, "Who gave you permission to enter? Who said you could join the Shiur?" And without missing a beat, Mordechai Anon said, "Haveti peteg me'a'ima," which means, "I brought a note from my mother." Rav Moshe just broke down laughing. He said, "No, you can stay." That was the only time anyone ever got into a shiur without asking permission, because he appreciated the repartee. And so that's how I was admitted to the shiur. Anyway, he also was an individual with amazing. When I talk about sensitivity to people and understanding and intensity, Rabbi Dr told me that he was once driving in a taxi. Here's a story. He was once driving in a taxi in Israel Thursday evening, and the taxi driver, secular Israeli, said to Rabbi Dr, "Where are you going?" So Rabbi Dr said to him, "I'm going to shiur." So the taxi driver says to him, "Which shiur? I want to know. Who shiur are you going to?" It was Ramat Shlomo. Which shiur are you going to? So Rabbi Dr said, "It's a rabbi. You won't know who he is." So the taxi driver said to him, "No, Tagidli. Which rabbi are you going to hear?" He said, "R Moshe Shapira." The taxi driver said, "R Moshe Shapira? I'm his neighbor. I live in his building in Beit Vegan. And I want to tell you something that happened to me with R Moshe Shapira." And he tells Rabbi Dr, this is what happened. He said, one day, R Moshe Shapira was coming out of the front. Rav Shapira's house was on the ground floor in Rehov Uziel. And I live in the same building. And I was in my taxi. I'm about to drive off. And I see Harav, Mechubad, Rav Shapira is coming out of his apartment. So I immediately said, "Rav Shapira, can I take you? I won't charge you. I'll take you wherever you want to go. It'd be my great honor to take the Rav. Tremendous respect." Like many Israelis, particular background, particular ethnic background, they have that respect. Actually, Kvod Rav, I'll take you wherever you want to go. So Rav Moshe got into his taxi, and before he could turn on the engine, he puts his hand was on the gear lever. Rav Moshe gently put his hand over my hand, and he said to me, he looked at me, he said, "Ata noheg b'Shabbat?" He said, "Do you drive on Shabbat?" And he said, I couldn't say yes. I said no. And since then, I never have. He said, I couldn't say yes. I saw those eyes boring into me. I couldn't say yes. I couldn't say yes. And I couldn't lie. So I said no, and I never have. Okay, so I guarantee if you looked at you like that, you'd also say no. So these are some of my, I've kept you later than I should have. These are some of my memories. He was an individual who had a tremendous originality of mind. Not only did he know everything, I mean, any book, any Torah book, no matter how rare, you could start him off anywhere. Not only would he know it, he'd know the commentaries on it, and he'd know the depths, and he'd know different positions on it, and but not only that, he had a tremendously original take on things. He appreciated, for example, people who could open you up to new things. I once asked him, my friend Rav Borden once asked him about Rav Tzadok HaKohen, and it turned out that Rav Moshe had directed him to learn certain things in Rav Tzadok. And when it turned out that after Rav Borden had learned these things, Rav Shapira turned out to disagree with him. Rav Borden said to him, "Why you tell me to learn him if you disagree?" He said, "I didn't send you there to agree with him. I sent you there to have a new vision." Right? I once heard Rav Moshe say something amazing. He said, "What Torah should give you is new ears. Oznaim chadashot, new ears, not new material in the same old ears." Listen, he told me this personally once. He said, when you learn Torah, what you should gain, what you should develop is new ears. New ears. If you hear the Torah through the same old ears, it makes you worse. Torah has to, Oznaim karita li Hashem, he quoted. The pasuk with David HaMelech. Oznaim karita li Hashem. You've torn open new ears for me. You don't want Torah to go into the same ears. You want Torah to open new ears, to develop new vessels. Rav Shapira once told me, he said, when young boys come to the yeshiva for the first time, he says, you see immediately which are the ones who are a little overconfident and they've got the wrong kind of ears, and everything they hear goes into the same preconceptions. And the more you teach them, the worse they become. The more you teach them, the more they bend it into their own preconceptions. And the more they learn, the worse they become. And you see the young ones who come in with open ears, that everything they hear radically shifts their position and they can open themselves to new things. What Torah should be doing as you're a teacher, may I say this to those of you who are teachers, if you're a Torah teacher, what you try to develop in your students is new ears, not new material in the same old ears. All you do is have it distorted worse. And the more you put in, the more they distort it, the worse they'll hear it. And therefore, Oznaim karita li Hashem. And he had the power to do that. If you were sensitive and were prepared to be open. I must tell you personally, I completely humbled myself. I never I never put on any airs with him. I never tried to deceive him in any way. It was hopeless. I just gave up all ego. I can admit that completely openly. I used to sit right next to him, take him his tea, and I divested myself completely of ego. It was no use pretending that you knew more than you did. He was going to see through it anyway. So I just, I opened my ears and allowed him to form them in a new way, to the best of my ability. He himself was a young student in the house of Rav Dessler. He was related to Rav Dessler, and he was 15, I think, when Rav Dessler's Rebbetzin died. And he spent time in the house actually serving and helping Rav Dessler. And I once asked him, being that close as he was to Rav Dessler, I once asked him, what did he learn from him? I had the chutzpah to ask him, what did he learn from Rav Dessler? He said to me, "Hu patachli harbe dvarim." He opened many things for me, which means he didn't always agree. I heard him disagree with Rav Dessler, or at least the way Rav Dessler was presented in the world. On a number of occasions, disagreed. But tremendous, tremendous respect. Hu patachli harbe dvarim. In other words, what you gain from a great teacher is being opened. You're being open to things. You come with your old-fashioned, your old existing Torah preconceptions, your old intellectual preconceptions, and you hear new stuff. It doesn't change you at all. It makes you more locked into your previous paradigm. That's not what Torah is supposed to be. Torah is supposed to be, and what he gave us an ability to see things in a breadth that is. He always was one step beyond. I'll give you an example. But I mean, this was typical. I'll give an example. It's Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloch L'Olam Va'ed. Just taking one example that comes to mind. Hashem is king. Hashem was king. Hashem will be king. Listen carefully, please. I'll do my best to express it the way he expressed it. Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloch. That means Hashem, God is king. He was king. He will be king. Rabbi Shapira said, people think it means yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Hashem was king in the past. He's king now, and he'll be king tomorrow. He was king 1,000 years ago. He's king of the world now, and he'll be king in 1,000 years' time when Mashiach comes. Moshe said that's not what's meant. That is explicitly not what's meant. Past, present, and future does not mean that. Listen carefully, please. I'll do my best to express it. If you think it means Hashem was king yesterday, and he's king today, and king tomorrow, that's all called today. That's all called present. What is the nature of the present? The nature of the present is the transition from past to future. That is the present. There's no such thing as the present. There's no graspable moment of the present. The present is a notion, a notion of an infinitesimal. An infinitesimal has no duration. When we talk about the present moment, there's no present moment. Every present moment is a slippage from past into future. When you talk about the present, you mean yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Am I making some sense? Anyone out there with me? If you say Hashem was king, is king, and will be king, right? You don't mean 5 minutes ago, now, and in 5 minutes' time. That's called now. The nature of now is a transition from past through present into future. What does it mean? It means Hashem was king before time began. He's king within time, and he'll be king when time ends. That's something to think about. But you're talking about that's something to think about. That's what the Chazal are telling you. Not to hear Chazal in your same old infantile ears. And everything you could do. And then when you thought about it, you went back to him, he would show you another depth. I'm just choosing one isolated, simple example. But it was a substantial of thought, always an ability to think into the next dimension, the next layer. You find a solution to a problem. You don't stop there. What's the difficulty with this solution? Can you solve that problem? Always one step ahead, and only teaching you what you needed. You went home, you came back a week later, you perceived something new. Okay, fine. Then he'd show you the next layer. Right? Okay, you'll forgive me if I've kept you a little longer than planned. Here's a nice another little turn of humor that I forgot to tell you. I was once present when a lady asked Rav Moshe the following thing. He was talking about Yaakov Avinu's Yeshli Kol. Again, you need to be Israeli to appreciate this, or at least have a little Hebrew, but I'll tell you anyway. He's talking about Yaakov Avinu said, Yeshli Kol, I have everything. So this lady leaned forward. She happened to be present. It was not in Israel. It was a place where some ladies had come into the Shiur, and this lady was there. And she said, Yeshli Kol, is that the similar quality to a Kol Yaakov, right? A Kol Yaakov v'yadayim yedei Esav. After we're talking about Yaakov, and Yaakov says, Yeshli Kol. So she said to him, is that the same as by Yaakov when it says, a Kol Yaakov? Now, of course, if you know a little bit of Hebrew, those are completely different words. They're spelled completely differently, right? Yeshli Kol is one word in Hebrew, and Kol Yaakov is a completely different word, but So Rav Moshe said, in a very kind and patient way, with just a smile playing on his lips, he said, "Lo," he said, "Aval ulai ze bas kuf kabas chaf." He said, "No, that's not what's being referred to. But maybe it's referring to the statement that says that when Sarah was 20, she was like 100. Bas kuf kabas chaf." Okay, think about it if you speak a little Hebrew, but on the turn, without a moment needed for any thought. And again, those are some of my personal experiences. I mean, I spent, I can say I really, personally, I devoted myself to him and my relationship with him, completely humbled myself and made it so much easier to learn. I asked him everything of a major nature. I originally used to ask him major life and death medical questions as well, but remember on one occasion I went to him with a very interesting and difficult life and death question. Happened to be a woman who had cancer, discovered while she was pregnant. And the doctors wanted to give her chemotherapy, which meant inevitably a termination of the pregnancy. And the woman wanted to delay the chemotherapy. She was 32 years old. It was a very precious pregnancy. She wanted to delay the chemotherapy in order to have the baby, which meant that she would have the child, but her chemo would be delayed, and that might make a difference to her life. And I'd thoroughly researched the medical background, what was the percentage risk to her, and what was there. I went into it. And I went to Rav Moshe one day, it was on a Friday afternoon, by Vagan, and I asked him, is it permissible for this lady to delay the chemo in order to have the child? And Rav Moshe said to me, he told me exactly what to do. In that case, she clearly is allowed to. And he said, but go and ask Rabbi Elyashiv, because he makes the decisions every day. And in fact, I went to Rabbi Elyashiv and he gave exactly the same ruling as Rav Moshe. From then on, I used to ask Rabbi Elyashiv my medical questions. I think Rav Moshe gave me the clear indication from that time on, that he prepared to answer the questions, but he said, these are life and death questions. There's a certain mile and a certain bracha in asking. And from then I used to go and ask Rabbi Elyashiv. But sometimes I would discuss them with Rabbi Moshe, but I used to formally ask Rabbi Elyashiv those questions. Let me maybe finish. Again, there's endless amounts to say. I've got a whole bunch of notes and my own videos and photographs and notes, which some point need to be organized, I suppose. But how did my relationship with him begin on a formal basis? So one Tuesday afternoon, I decided I have to tell him that he's my Rebbe. You know, I mean, I need him to know. He needs to take responsibility for me if he's going to guide my life. I needed a Rebbe. You don't grow in Torah without a Rebbe. You don't grow in Torah without a Rebbe. And therefore, I knew that if I was going to grow seriously, I needed to be mevatel my das. That means to take somebody bigger than me. And it took me a long time to find somebody that I could trust at that level. Before that, I had somebody who asked halachically, was superb. Another individual I used to ask for life decisions was also amazing. But one person I could ask on all levels and with such a clarity that he was way beyond me, beyond measure. And I found him that it became very clear. So I needed him to know that he's taking responsibility for me. So one Tuesday I was, and as I say, I had the seat written. I would not allow anyone to sit there, and I had to fight off Israelis. Okay, but I sat right there next to him on the shiur. And as he walked past me, it was quite a small room. As he walked in front of me, I said to him, "Shalom Alecha Rebbe." Shalom Alecha Rebbe, which is a clear, statement of you are my Rebbe. And then as he turned to sit down, I said to him, I leaned forward and I said, "Nachon shemutar lagdim shalom derabo." I said to him, I am correct, am I not, that one may greet one's Rebbe before being greeted? It's a halachic discussion. Do you wait to be greeted? What's the more respectful thing to do when you have a teacher? Do you sit silently and wait to be greeted? Or do you show the respect of greeting him first? So I said, it is correct, is it not, that one may greet one's teacher right before he greets you? So Rav Moshe said to him in a voice like ice, he said, "Ulai, aval kan ze lo relevanti." He said, "Maybe, but here it's not relevant." So I said, "Lo, ze relevanti." And with a sort of a sigh of submission and resignation, he sat down. And then I told him, "Yeah, whether you like it or not, you're my Rebbe." And from now on, you'll be making the decisions. Those are the insights. Anyway, look, there's a lot more to say. Thank you very much for joining me. There are people even on this webinar, whatever you call it, who know more than I do. I know it's Rabbi Gershenfeld gracing us with his presence. I'm sure, Rabbi Gershenfeld, if you have something to say that I've not expressed well enough or something I should have said, I'm sure you'll speak up and be kind enough to add it. But But if not, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you to Nechama. Thanks to Ariel. If there's anything I can share, please look at the site. I'll try to post on my own website anything that's relevant. And I'll leave you with that. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to leave you with the last stanza of If. Can I do that for you? Let these words ring in your ears, as Rabbi Moshe told a young student seeking his direction in life. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or work with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute, the 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son.